Hey guys, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040, bringing to you a brand new review series where I'm going to be talking about Season 1 of the original Transformers G1 cartoon. I'll also be talking about how I first became aware of the show and how I became such a big fan. And also in this series, I'm also going to be talking about some of my favourite episodes from Season 1. It's no surprise and no secret that Transformers G1, or just Transformers in general, is one of the most iconic and most famous franchises in history. There isn't a single person out there who doesn't know what Transformers is, and even if there's some people who never grew up with the cartoon or they've never bought the toys or collected them, you say Transformers, lots of people know what it is. And it's no surprise because it's been going for close to over 30 years, so that was even before my time. And the concept of good robots versus evil robots with emotional feelings and all that sort of stuff is an amazing concept, and the idea of these two sides at war for millions and millions of years on another planet and then bring it to planet Earth is an amazing thing. And I've seen virtually every version of Transformers. I've bought every single comic book ever since it made its comeback 17 years ago in 2003. I've even got some old Transformers UK comics that used to come out here occasionally. I've got every single Ladybird book that my gran used to buy for me. I've seen only the first three movies because, being the hardcore geek that I am, I'm not really a great fan of the movies. I've only seen the first three. I love the Bumblebee movie. I have that on Blu-ray. And even though Transformers G1 finished in the States, a lot of people don't realise it still continued in Japan in different versions for many years, I think up to 10 years. So how did it all start? It all started back in 1992. We had just got Sky Satellite. Sky Satellite was just a little black analog box, so there was no Sky Digital yet, not for many years after. So that was how it all started. I first saw Transformers on Sky 1. It used to come on every Saturday and Sunday morning on a block called Fun Factory. Now, probably a lot of people don't know Fun Factory. What they used to do was they used to show loads of different cartoons, and with Transformers they used to show an old episode and then they used to show a new episode. So you'd see last week's episode, for example, but then you'd see a brand new one next week along with the old episode from the week before. But I didn't just see it on Sky 1, I used to see it on German TV, on a German channel called RTL. So whenever Transformers G1 was on, whether it was RTL or Sky 1, I was there, I saw it. What I liked more about RTL was they used to show very obscure episodes of the G1 cartoon. Sky 1 used to just show the same ones over and over, which was okay for me at the time, but RTL used to show a lot of episodes that Sky 1 didn't show, and I was hooked from the word go. I mean, I absolutely enjoyed the show. I never ever missed an episode, and I'll never forget the first time I actually saw the G1 intro, which is this one here. I knew straight away that this wasn't going to be your typical weekend cartoons on a Saturday morning, so to speak. It was very, very different. It had a very patriotic theme to it, and when you saw the logo flip over from blue to purple, that's when I knew this is going to be a very good cartoon. And then the first shot you see is Optimus Prime running into battle, and it was a very basic intro, good versus evil going at it, and it really got you excited for the show. And it had a very basic theme, as I said. It was Transformers, like that. But it was a lot of fun. It really was. And as I said, seeing the two sides, the Autobots and the Decepticons going at it, made for a lot of fun, and it really set the tone for what the show was going to be all about. And as I said, I absolutely loved it from the word go. And the cool thing about Transformers, especially with the Autobots and Decepticons going at it, is they both had respective leaders. And the Autobots' leader was, of course, Optimus Prime. Now, Optimus Prime obviously is probably the most iconic of the Transformers. I mean, in my opinion, he probably is the face of Transformers. There isn't a single person out there, as I said earlier, who doesn't know what Transformers is. And the first thing you always see is Optimus Prime's picture. Optimus Prime, to me, he was like Superman of the show. You know, like Superman is the leader of the Justice League. He's like the greatest hero of all time. And that's the same with Optimus Prime. He was like Superman. He was like the leader of the pack, so to speak. And Optimus Prime, to me, he was like the dad of the Autobots. He was like the dad. He looked after everyone. He had everyone's back. Everybody looked up to him and respected him. And the thing about Optimus Prime, he wasn't just like a patriotic sort of hero. I mean, he had ideals, like any good hero does. He had morals, but he was a very laid-back leader. He was very quiet, and he had a very calm and quiet voice, and that's what made him such an endearing character. And a lot of that is down to the amazing voice talent of Peter Cullen. Peter Cullen, to me, is like what Kevin Conroy is for Batman. When you think of Optimus Prime, you think of Peter Cullen. There is nobody who has made more of a mark on that character than Peter Cullen. I mean, there's been other guys, I know, who have done the voice of Optimus Prime, but for me, Peter Cullen is the definitive voice of Optimus Prime. Whenever I read a Transformers comic book, the first person's voice I hear in my head is Peter Cullen when I'm reading a dialogue. I mean, he's got such a distinct voice and a way of executing his lines. And Optimus Prime, he was the guy that he would always do what's right for the greater good. He would sacrifice himself if he needed to protect his fellow Autobots. And he was very endearing to humans. He was very kind, and you know, he was very fascinated by planet Earth, and in many ways he looked at planet Earth as like his home, even though he says to himself, we are visitors, but we are still living here, and it is our duty to make sure that the Earth is protected at all costs against the Decepticons. And that's what really made him such an enduring character. And also, one thing that was never really talked about as much in the show, I mean, we did see it quite a lot, but we never really talked about it that much, was Optimus Prime was incredibly strong. I remember there was one episode in season 1, he lifted up a boat, like a giant boat, and threw it onto Megatron. So, you know, he was really strong, and he was tough, and he was not only an incredible leader, but he was an incredible fighter as well. He really knew how to hold his own in a fight, but he wasn't what you call a brawler, so to speak, but he knew how to hold his own in a fight against the Decepticons. And I think the Decepticons, even though they fear Optimus Prime, even though Optimus Prime was never a type of guy you'd be fearful of, there was always a mutual respect. They knew that whenever Optimus Prime arrived on the scene, they knew they were screwed, and the Autobots knew that because he's the man. And I'm not saying that without Optimus Prime, the Autobots are nothing. It's not entirely true, but just to have him there, holding all these guys together and bringing them all together as one, makes all the difference. And that's why Optimus Prime has endeared for so long, and that's what makes him the face of the Transformers franchise, as far as I'm concerned. And nobody, I don't think, has ever even come close to that. And what's a great hero without having a great villain? And that's where Megatron comes into it, who is voiced by the legendary Frank Welker, and he would also go on to voice many of the other Decepticons in the course of the show's run. Now, just like Mark Hamill is the definitive voice of the Joker, Frank Welker to me is the definitive voice of Megatron. Whenever I think of Megatron or I'm reading his dialogue in the comic books, I think of Frank Welker, as he has made a true mark on Megatron, in my honest opinion. Now, Megatron is the leader of the Decepticons. To me, Megatron was, like I said, Optimus Prime is like the Superman of the show. Then I would say Megatron is Lex Luthor of the show, although probably a lot more ruthless and evil than Lex Luthor is. Megatron, in many ways, is the opposite of Optimus Prime. He doesn't care about the Decepticons. Obviously, he wants loyalty from his troops, like any great leader would, but he always took out his anger on the Decepticons if things didn't go the way they should. He was all about world domination. He was all about draining the planet's energon dry and then restoring Cybertron. So him and Optimus Prime both have the same goals, but they go about it in different ways. Obviously, Optimus Prime wants to restore Cybertron to its former glory. Megatron wants to do that, but in his own sick image, so to speak. He wants to enslave all of the Autobots, or anyone who follows the Autobots, and rule over them with an iron fist. So that makes Megatron the perfect villain for Optimus Prime to fight, because like with any media, whether it's cartoons, movies, stories, whatever you want to call it, a hero is only as good as the villain he fights. So Superman has Lex Luthor, Batman has the Joker, Wonder Woman has Cheetah, Green Lantern has Sinestro, the Flash has Reverse Flash, Optimus Prime of course has Megatron. Now, when these two would go at it, it's a fight, not just a few kicks and punches. These two really go at it. Kind of similar to how Captain America and the Red Skull would. When these two go at it, they really go at it. And what makes Megatron an interesting villain is he does respect Optimus Prime in his own sick way, but he doesn't agree with his ideals. Kind of like Magneto and Xavier in the X-Men. They both share the same vision, but they disagree with the way it's executed. Megatron always says to Prime, "Why do you care about these humans so much? We're much more powerful than them. We could rule over them." And Prime would say, for example, "Well, no, Megatron. If we do that, then we're no better. There's other ways to settle this." And Megatron has always accused Prime of being weak and soft. And Megatron always says that it's because you're so soft and weak, that's why you'll lose this war, because Megatron is so arrogant and so self-assured in his own ability that he truly believes that he could win. And that's what makes him a very compelling villain. But it has to be said, Megatron is probably soft in his own way, because you've got a villain like Starscream on your team and has made no secret at the fact that he wants to be leader of the Decepticons, and has gone on record many times that he would stab Megatron in the back to take his place, because he truly believes that he's the most handsome, the most qualified, and the most powerful of all of the Decepticon troops, and that he is the rightful Decepticon to lead them into battle and win the war. And as great as having a hero and a villain go at it, it's always better when you see two villains go at it. And Megatron and Starscream's relationship is at times very funny and very up and down. And Megatron, you'd think someone as powerful as him would get rid of someone like Starscream. You always ask that question for years, why does he keep this guy around? Why does he just get rid of him? But I truly believe Megatron thinks that, well, Starscream's good at his job. That's the only reason I keep him. If he wasn't, I'd have got rid of him years ago. So that makes for an interesting dynamic, and he knows deep down if Starscream took over as leader of the Decepticons, then I think the war would have truly been lost a long time ago. So as fun as it is watching them two go at it, it's always good watching Prime and Megatron go at it as well. And one of my favourite fights between Megatron and Prime was when they had the big battle on Sherman Dam. I think that was in part 2 of More Meets the Eye. And it's quite funny because all throughout the fight, Optimus Prime, who's this very heroic, laid-back Autobot, he's taunting Megatron and calling him names and things like that. And it's very rare you see something like that from Optimus Prime. And it was a really fun fight, and you see Megatron had like a ball and chain and Prime had an axe, and seeing these two go at it with the dam on the verge of collapsing made for a great visual. And it's one of the best fight scenes of the show, and it was only in like the second episode, and it was a lot of fun. It's one of my all-time favourites. And what I also loved about the show was we got the addition of the Dinobots. We even got to see how the Dinobots were created and how they joined the Autobots, and these guys were one of my all-time favourite teams growing up. And what I loved about the Dinobots was they were Autobots that transformed into dinosaurs. I mean, how cool was that? I mean, you had Grimlock, you had Slag, Sludge, Snarl and Swoop. And what I liked about the Dinobots, especially in those early episodes, was they never really talked much, but they sure did give you a good old-fashioned beating. They were robots of few words, but their actions spoke louder. And these guys were one of the best parts about the show, and you knew when you saw the Dinobots arrive on the scene. Just like I said earlier with Prime, you knew when Prime arrived you were screwed, but at least you had a fair shot at beating him. But when the Dinobots arrived, you were screwed. 100% royally screwed. And I love these guys as well. I think I remember one episode, the Dinobots turned on Optimus Prime and we got to see Optimus Prime go at it with the Dinobots. So that was a great episode as well. I'll probably talk about that in a future video at some point. But yeah, these guys were amazing characters, and even though they were good guys, they still needed training like pets, because they were just out of control. And the Dinobots were like, well, why should we help you? Why should we care? And then you'd ask them, well, why are you saying that for? You're good guys. Why don't you want to help us? And they would just look at each other and be like, well, I don't know. So even though they were incredibly strong, their intelligence wasn't as strong, but what they lacked in intelligence they made up with lots of heart and lots of strength. So they were an awesome addition to the team and to the show, and they were hugely popular and have remained so for many, many years. And the Dinobots weren't the only new characters to join the show. We had the Constructicons. Now, the Constructicons made their debut at the end of Season 1 in an episode called Heavy Metal War. Now, the Constructicons were exactly what the name says. They were Decepticons that transformed into construction vehicles, and they used to build things for Megatron and used to do all sorts of different construction jobs for him. Now, they were the first combiners team of the show. So when these 6 Constructicons would merge, they would form into Devastator, one of the most powerful combiners of all time. And I loved the Constructicons. I thought they were a very interesting team, very sneaky, and they were very, very loyal to Megatron. Even though they had their moments where they would disagree with him, the Constructicons were a big part of the show, and I loved them. They were definitely one of the best additions to the Decepticons, in my honest opinion, and they appeared in many, many episodes over the course of the show and played big, big roles in some of the big, famous story arcs in the show, as well as in the comic books as well in recent years. So yeah, these guys are awesome team. Their origin story is a little bit jumbled up depending on what version you go with, but they were great. I had nothing bad to say about the Constructicons. They were definitely the best part of the show as well. Another Transformer we saw made his debut is Skyfire, or as he's known in toys, depending on what version you go with, as Jetfire. Now, I know him more as Skyfire, and Skyfire would go on to become one of my all-time favourite Transformers / Autobots of all time. He's up there with Optimus Prime. Now, Skyfire was a very interesting Transformer and a very interesting addition to the show. His origin story was tied to Starscream, so that made for quite a good episode, which was called Fire in the Sky. I'll probably be doing a review of that episode over the course of this review series. And Skyfire and Starscream were best friends slash scientists slash explorers. So Skyfire was one of the largest Transformers. He was much bigger than Prime, and he transformed into a space shuttle sort of jet sort of vehicle. And just like Prime, he was very kind, very soft spoken, and he was a team player, always looked out for his teammates, and in many ways he looked as the Autobots, which he would go on to join them at the end of the episode, as his family, just like Prime does. So if Optimus Prime is the dad of the Autobots, then I would say Skyfire is like the big brother. Like, he's like a giant, friendly big brother who would always watch your back. And I loved Skyfire. He was a really unique character. He was one of my all-time favourites, and still is. And what makes him interesting is he's a very conflicted character, because in the episode where he made his debut, he initially joins the Decepticons due to his old friendship with Starscream, and you would see Megatron and Starscream yelling at him and barking orders at him to destroy the Autobots, and you would see he was very, very conflicted, because he's not really evil. He was never evil. Even though they tried to push him as a villain, you could see deep down he was a good person. He was a good Transformer. And that iconic moments where we see him rip off the Decepticon insignia and place the Autobots insignia in its place was a real cool moment, because I am now an Autobot was a real cool moment. And I loved Skyfire. He went on to become, as I said earlier, one of my all-time favourites, and he played quite a big role in a lot of episodes in Season 1. He was in a portion of Season 2 before they just quietly phased him out, and he was never to be seen again. I don't know why, because I loved him a lot, and I would love to have seen him in the movie, even if just in a cameo, or even just a little cameo in Season 3. He was never spoken of again. So, shame really. He was a very underrated character, and he was a fine addition to the team. He had some cool moments with a lot of the Autobots, and he got to mix it up with Megatron and Starscream as well, so he was a great character. I loved him. And we also saw the debut of the Insecticons. Now, the Insecticons were exactly as the name says. They were Decepticons that transformed into robotic insects. Now, what makes the Insecticons very interesting was they were Decepticons, but they weren't on the same page with Megatron, so to speak. They were not always following Megatron. They were more like their own team, so to speak. They were always doing their own thing, and they would only join Megatron if they needed to suit their own ends. So in a way, Megatron and the Insecticons would use each other. So it was quite interesting that they all hated each other, but in a weird, sick kind of way, they all needed each other. And the Insecticons had a very interesting ability. They were able to replicate themselves and make copies of themselves. So you had Shrapnel, the leader, Kickback, and Bombshell. Now, these three were very hungry Decepticons. They will always be eating energon, food, anything to make them stronger. And sometimes their appetite got the better of them. They always let their hunger get in the way of their mission. But they were a very unique team. I quite like the Insecticons. They were only in, I think, one episode of Season 1, and I think they played a much bigger role later on in Season 2. But they were great. They were a great addition to the Decepticons when they were part of the team. But they were very, very interesting. And one of the Insecticons in particular I liked was Bombshell, because Bombshell used a thing called a Cerebro Shell. Now, the Cerebro Shell was some sort of shell where he would shoot it at a Decepticon's or an Autobot's forehead, and he would be able to control their mind. So that was quite an interesting ability, because there are very few Decepticons that had the power to use mind control. So to have an Insecticon using mind control through a Cerebro shell was very unique. So in a way, I would have probably made Bombshell the leader, because if you could have a Transformer who could control an Autobot or a Decepticon, that guy definitely deserves to be the leader. I mean, no disrespect to Shrapnel or Kickback, they think more of their bellies. Bombshell was more of a thinker, and we got to see him use Cerebro shells over the course of the show. So probably out of those three, I probably liked Bombshell the most, because he had a very unique ability and was very underrated, and it was not something you'd seen much in Transformers. So the Insecticons were definitely fun. So when they would appear on the show, you knew that someone was getting squashed, because the Autobots were always like, oh look, it's the bugs again, we better squash them. So I definitely liked them. Probably not as much as some of the other teams, but I didn't dislike the Insecticons. But as I said, my favourite Insecticon of the trio was definitely Bombshell. He was my favourite. And also the humans played a very big part in the Transformers cartoon. Sparkplug and his son Spike have been a part of the Transformers mythos ever since the beginning. They were introduced in the comic books, and they've been a staple part of the cartoon ever since their first appearance in episode 1 of More Than Meets the Eye. Now, what I liked about the humans playing a part in the story was it wasn't just all the humans. They were there, they had a big part, but it wasn't all about the humans. They just played like a second or third big part of the story. And also, what I liked about Sparkplug and Spike was they would help with repair works in the base. They played a very big part in the construction of the Dinobots, and they were just great to have around. And it was good to have that human element to the show, where Sparkplug and his son could explain human culture to like Optimus Prime or some of the other Autobots. So it was very important to have those two in the show, and they made a huge difference. And some of the big moments on the show was with Sparkplug and his son Spike. Now, Spike in particular would go on to have a very important role, especially with his relationship with Bumblebee. Now, their friendship would become the stuff of Transformers legends that are made of. Their relationship was a big staple part of the Transformers mythos for many, many years. They would remain best friends all throughout the show's run, right up to the very end. We even saw them still remain best friends in season 3 of Transformers, where Spike is a grown man married with a son named Daniel, and it was a really good relationship. It was like a brotherly friendship, so to speak, and these two would go on to have many, many adventures together. They would always get into trouble or in danger, and it was always up to Optimus Prime or the others to rescue them. So they were definitely a very, very big part of the show. And, Spike, in the end of the show's run, he would sort of become a Transformer in his own right. Him and Cerebros would become Fortress Maximus. They would play a very big part in the Headmaster's story arc. So I would say, in my honest opinion, as much of an important character as Sparkplug was as a father, I would say Spike was probably the most important human character of the entire Transformers mythology, because he started out as a construction worker's son, then would become an ambassador / father and husband, and then eventually he would become one of the leading figures of the Autobots in his own right. So Spike, even though nobody thought it at the time, Spike's addition to the show was very, very important. And one character I liked the most was Chip Chase. His role in the show was criminally underrated. He never gets talked about that much, especially when it comes to the history of the Transformers. And in my honest opinion, I think Chip Chase was the huge difference maker. He was super smart, very, very intelligent. He knew a lot about technology, machinery, space, and all sorts of things. And I think having a scientist type of character for the Transformers, especially for the Autobots, made a huge, huge difference to the overall story. In my honest opinion, Chip Chase was like a young Stephen Hawking combined with Albert Einstein. He knew so much about everything, and he played a very, very big part in the construction of the Dinobots. And what I also liked about Chip Chase was that he was so fascinated by the Transformers, and especially the Autobots, and him and Spike would go on to have a great relationship as well. He would also become good friends with Bumblebee as well, and I think I remember in one episode Chip Chase actually went to Cybertron, so that was a really cool thing to see. And I don't know why, but after we got to season 3, we never saw Chip Chase again. He was never talked about. I know there was a couple of pictures I saw of him as an adult, but he was never seen or spoken of again. I remember he had a very brief cameo in the Japanese dubbed episode called Scramble City, where you saw him working with the Autobots building Metroplex, but that was it really. I would have loved to have seen more of him in season 3, and I would love to have seen what his reaction would have been to Optimus Prime dying and Rodimus Prime taking over as leader. It would have been very, very interesting. But I absolutely loved Chip Chase. He was awesome, and he never gets talked about. As I said, very, very underrated character, and in my honest opinion, he's up there with Spike and Sparkplug in terms of being the human element to the story. So in a way, if you have Sparkplug and Spike to explain human culture, then I would say Chip Chase was definitely the science culture. Like, he could explain all the science stuff, and it was really cool to see him working with Ratchet and Wheeljack and Hoist and all of the other officers who would specialise in construction and medics and science. So he was a great addition to the show, and he was probably my favourite character. I'd probably put him up there with Spike. He was awesome. And as much as I loved watching the TV show, I loved owning it on video just as much. And Arrival from Cybertron was the first ever Transformers video that I ever owned. My dad bought it for me a long, long time ago, and I thought it was a movie. I learned later on that was not true. It was just 3 episodes stuck together. It was actually the 3-parter pilot of Transformers when they first came to Earth, and how the war started and all that sort of stuff. And this video would have a lot of good memories for me. I watched it to death so many times, and I think I owned about 3 different versions of this video. Same episodes, but like 3 different covers, but it didn't bother me, because just to have those videos was a rare thing, because Transformers videos at the time were very, very hard to find, and just to even have one was an accomplishment in its own right. So Arrival from Cybertron holds a lot of good memories for me growing up, and in my honest opinion, as much as I love all of the episodes of Transformers, the first episode will always hold a special place in my heart, because it's the one that I've gone back to the most, and rightly so. It's a classic. And shortly after, I would collect most of the Transformers on VHS. I mean, all the ones that were available to buy, as you can see here. And some of them were very, very rare. I mean, Starscream's Ghost was very, very rare, and this one in particular, Cosmic Rust and Masquerade, they were equally very hard to find. And I don't know what it is about this one in particular, but it was just so damn hard to find. Even back then, I think I went about maybe 5 or 7 years trying to track this down. And I remember one day we went to a video store in Soho in central London in Leicester Square, and there it was, one copy for £4, and I bought it. And it's still in great condition to this day. I still have it. And yeah, I mean, I do like it, but as I said, it's just really hard to find, and I don't care whatever happens, I'm not getting rid of it. In fact, I'm not getting rid of any of the Transformers VHSs because they're so rare, and I think they've gone on to become collector's items now. They're long out of print, so whoever's got them, keep hold of them because they're worth quite a bit of money, in my opinion. And that's how I became a big fan of Transformers, and that's why I've remained a big fan for so many years. I've been a hardcore, loyal follower of the franchise for many, many years. As I said at the beginning, I've seen every version of the cartoon. I've bought every single comic book title since it made its comeback back in 2003, 17 years ago, and I've experienced all of the ups and downs that the franchise has experienced, and I've seen only the first 3 movies. I wasn't a big fan, but I did like the first one because it was very groundbreaking and very important to me. But I did love the Bumblebee movie, directed by Travis Knight. I thought it was a great film, and it reminded me of why I am a Transformers fan for all these years. And there you have it. So I'm going to leave this here for you guys. The next time I will be back, I will be talking about some of my favourite episodes from Season 1. So I'm going to decide which one I'm going to be talking about first. But until then, you know what to do. Leave your thoughts and comments down below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Let me know how you first became a fan of the show and how you became a big fan of the Transformers franchise. And I will see you all next time. So till then, take care everybody, and remember, till all are one.